Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time we're talking about the Doctor Who episode Cold War. And this is, in many ways, a really retro episode on a lot of levels, but it's retro in a way that really works. It's retro in a way that really makes for a good episode and is also a chance to really be reminiscent of what was strong and positive about Doctor Who in the past, particularly the original incarnation of the show before it was returned back in 2005. So let's get right into it. Now, the big thing here that we have is the return of the Ice Warriors. The Ice Warriors have not basically been seen since 1974, almost 40 years. The last time they duked it out with a third Doctor episode, I believe called like the Curse of Peliodon, something like that. And there's actually a rather funny reference to that episode here, when the Doctor says no more pretending to be blah blah blah, and includes Earth Ambassador in the list, because that was what he did, pretend to be the Earth Ambassador in that episode from the Jon Pertwee days. So, very nice little callback there. Now, another thing. Now, I think I've seen this episode, and maybe a little bit from the second Doctor era. I believe that's when they first appeared, if I remember right. But honestly, I barely remember anything about the Ice Warriors at all. Just that, despite their relatively few appearances, they've remained very popular among Doctor Who fans, and their return is something that people have been talking about and wanting to see for a really long time. Well, here it is, and we get them. And I have to say, this is a really, really nicely done reinterpretation of the Ice Warriors. Well, I guess I said reintroduction is probably a better word. Their armor is, again, very, very in keeping with what we saw in previous episodes. Just maybe modified just a tiny little bit, just to sort of bring it in focus is how I would think to put it. And I really like this episode that, for the most part, we only ever get to see these vague images and illusions of what this creature looks like, what an Ice Warrior actually looks like. Because this is, of course, the first time I believe we've ever seen them without their masks and armor and whatnot. And I like how the creature is just very, very vaguely alluded to. For the most part, we get to see only its hands. It starts off, just little glimpses here and there. We don't even get a clear look at anything, just movement. Then we get to see the thing's hands, and then it moves on to us seeing its eyes and a little bit of its face, its eyes and mouth. I remembered, that reminds me of an interview I saw with Jon Pertwee when he was talking about the various monsters on Doctor Who. And one of the ones that he complained about was the Ice Warriors, and said, something like eyes and mouth. If you can't really see them, the eyes and mouth, you can't really get any real performance out of them. So I like to think that Jon Pertwee would be satisfied that this issue has been addressed with the Ice Warriors. And I was honestly surprised at the very end when we got to see a full look at the Ice Warrior's face. Skaldak, I believe is how the guy says his name. Like I said, it really did genuinely surprise me that they had done that, because previously, like throughout the episode, of course, we'd only been getting hints of what he looked like, but we'd also, in keeping with old-timey Doctor Who tradition, only really gotten glimpses of the havoc, the destruction, the viciousness of what Skaldak was doing to the various people that he killed. And I kind of like that. I like that a lot of the horror of the scene is very implied. Now, of course, there's also the fact that Doctor Who is, in the UK, generally considered to be, something that families watch together, despite as grim as it can get at times. And, it's really not, at its core, certainly not a gory show. It's certainly nothing like you might see in, like, those Saw movies. And you know what? I'm glad. I don't really care for gore as a way of conveying horror. Now, not that there isn't a certain level of room for that out there. There is. There's room for quite a lot of things in horror. That's one of the beauties of the horror genre. But here, I like how, just like we do often in the old-time Doctor Who, a lot of the really scary stuff is only implied. We only get glimpses of the creature a lot of the time. We all the death and the destruction that these things wreak sometimes is only alluded to, implied, very generally, or well, anyway, you get what I'm saying. And I like that. It just really is a harkening back to how things were done in the older episodes, and a change of pace from what we see in modern TV and movies, where it's really show the blood and guts seems to be the norm. It's nice to see things take a step back from that. Now, let's kind of move on a little bit more into the story. First of all, I do have to say that there's one aspect of the story that I found to be incredibly weak, and is the reason that the Ice Warrior gets defrosted, Skaldak gets defrosted, is because some Russian sailor was dumb and bored. I mean, oh yeah, I'm gonna melt this thing out of the ice with a blowtorch. It's like, really? This is the best reason you could come up with? Is just I'm sorry, that's just incredibly weak writing. I know they had to come up with something, and it's like, okay, let's just get to the monster as quick as we can, but gee, couldn't we have just had like the refrigeration unit malfunction or something like that? I mean, I know it's cliche as heck, but it would certainly make a lot more sense than some Russian guy deciding, hey, I'm gonna get out this rare, archaeological / biological experiment and thaw it out with a blowtorch. I mean, geez, if you're gonna do that, at least show the guy being plastered first. Now, one thing I also liked was when they're talking about, well, okay, how long has this thing been in the ice? And the professor, having previously said that he believes a mammoth, says he figures it's been about 5,000 years. Well, that kind of made me, knit my brows, thinking, like, were there really mammoths roaming around 5,000 years ago? That seems a little recent. And, well, if Wikipedia is to believe, yeah, mammoths died out about 4,500 years ago. So 5,000 years ago, there were indeed mammoths still roaming around. So this makes the professor's guess perfectly reasonable, except the Ice Warrior is really not in any way, shape, or form shaped like a mammoth. I mean, where's the trunk? I mean, sure, you could probably make the case that he thought maybe he found a baby mammoth, but still, baby mammoths have trunk. I mean, I know this is something you really probably shouldn't dwell on overly much, but still, that this is supposed to be a very talented scientist. You'd think he would be like, nope, I don't know what it is, but it sure ain't a mammoth. Then again, maybe he'd only thought he found part of a mammoth. Who knows? It's not ultimately important to the story, but it's one of those things that if you stop and think about it, it's like, wait a second, that makes no sense at all. Now, getting into some more of the characterization stuff. Here, Claire is kind of taking a little bit of a backseat, and I'm honestly kind of glad. Now, I have said that I do indeed like Clara as a character, but after the last episode, a review that I read, I believe it was on IO9, pointed out really what was wrong with that episode and what was good about it in terms of Clara. And then basically what it was in a nutshell is, when the show was trying to really shove just how cool and awesome Clara was down your throat, the story wasn't very good. That stuff with the leaf at the very end. When the show was, stepped back and just sort of let Clara do her own thing, like when she was talking with the Queen of Years and, comforting her, that's when Clara really worked as a character. Now here, again, that's what they do. Clara sort of takes a step back. We see her exhibiting compassion towards the Ice Warrior. We see her being brave. We see her again, showing caring for the professor whom she was bonding with, trying to helping the Doctor, trying to reason with Skaldak. Very much traditional companion stuff, but it's still there, and it shows that it's still there, and it still speaks positively of her character. It speaks well of her as a character. But now, let's get into what's going on with the Doctor. Now, I kind of like how at the very beginning, when the Doctor's arguing with the captain, he says, like, the Skaldak will smell that you're a soldier on you, and the captain, no fool, quite easily points out that, well, would Skaldak smell a soldier on you? And if you stop and think about that, well, look at the Ninth Doctor. Here, in a way, there's a little bit of the Ninth Doctor sort of really bubbling to the surface inside the 11th Doctor. That the problems of the Time War and what the Doctor had to do. I mean, the Doctor, I believe, even said, I was a soldier. I fought in the Time War. That role, that being a soldier, so very different from the way the Doctor likes to see himself. The adventurer, the scientist, the eccentric, the iconoclast, particularly with the Fourth Doctor, the bohemian. But he had to put that aside and become a soldier. And as much as he might have moved on from that era in his life, that era in his life has unmistakably marked the Doctor. And the Captain quite rightly calls him out on that. He sees right through the Doctor on that one. And I like how there is no pausing to reminisce or to really talk about the Time War. It's all there. And anyone can really put two and two together. And I like that this show really didn't need to beat me over the head with what was going on there. I'm a fan. I've been a fan of Doctor Who since I was like 15 years old. I've seen pretty much everything. I can understand where it is they're going with that, and I like that they trust me to see what it is they are doing as a fan. And of course, this all sort of spirals into nothing to lose, mutually assured destruction. Nothing to lose. Boy, how much of that was there in the Ninth Doctor? I mean, how many times did he seem to really be willing to go to that brink? Again, this did really seem like something that could have been done as a Ninth Doctor story. But here it is, we're dealing with the 11th Doctor, so that aspect of his character, I'll do it, I will do it, was still there. And I really like that. The Ninth Doctor is really the second least explored Doctor after the 8th Doctor, at least in live action terms. So I like that there is that echo. And yeah, I think I'm trying to find something else I can really add to that, but that whole quality, I guess I could really just sum it up. That whole mutually assured destruction, nothing left to lose, really wonderfully reminiscent of the Ninth Doctor, and I'm glad that they went there, because of course that sort of thing is extraordinarily fitting given the time frame. I mean, 1983 is really one of those years where the world really did come closest to being destroyed in the Cold War. There was actually more than one incident that year when, due to equipment malfunctions, the Soviets, who were pretty high on the paranoia scale, honestly thought that America had launched the nukes. And there was one instance that year that basically, if some Russian radar operator hadn't said no, I am totally 100% sure this is an equipment malfunction, don't launch the missiles, then well, we would not be here right now. I mean, stop and think about that. One Russian guy keeping his cool basically helped ensure the fact that the human race is still alive. I mean, that is the reality of that era. And that is the world that was only 30 years ago. And for somebody like Clara, who's obviously under 30, it must seem like a time that's just unimaginable. But really, it's really just a time that really is just a stone's throw from where we are now. And I like how this really does do a good job of bringing the madness, mutually assured destruction, even by the people of the time, was considered to be very much a very ironic acronym, because, well, everybody knew if we start this war, then we're all screwed, the human race is probably doomed, this is crazy. But when, to put it bluntly, two people have guns pointed at each other's head, nobody wants to be the one that takes the gun away first. But, really, it's amazing how rapidly the world can change. 1983, only 6 years before the Berlin Wall fell. And just a few years after that, the Soviet Union just absolutely imploded overnight. I mean, I was a kid back then, and it was just monumental. It was unthinkable just how quickly the world changed. And suddenly, this specter of death and fear and just Armageddon just seemed to lift overnight, and suddenly the world seemed a different place. Of course, nature abhors a vacuum, and suddenly and very quickly there were new things besides the Russians and the communists to be afraid of. And honestly, there even were times in the 90s where people sort of just, rather than wanting to deal with terrorists and militias and the Middle East and all that, there were actually people who sometimes said, boy, I just wish I wish it was like back during the Cold War when things were simpler and the world was much more black and white. And it's very strange to try and imagine such a politically crazy time as the Cold War as being black and white. And while on one level that's an absurdity, that's also on another one level also very true. I mean, people really were saying something true when they talked about the free world. The world really was in many ways divided between two sides on a line. You had Western Europe and the United States, Canada and all that, where there was democracy and freedom, and then you had Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and you had communism and oppression and just really scary stuff. And of course, the world really wasn't that black and white. It wasn't so simple as just good guys and bad guys. I mean, really, the world has never been that simple. It never has been, it isn't, and it never will be. But the complexities of it all were, if you had to choose a side, well, there was really only two games in town. Who were you going to side with? The people who sent political people who disagree with the government off to gulags, or the people who let them wave around protest signs outside the White House or Parliament or whatever. But enough reminiscing of days gone by. We still have more to talk about. Well, okay, I tell a lie. We have a little bit more reminiscing to do because the Professor brought up Duran Duran, and specifically the song Hungry Like a Wolf. And Duran Duran and the song Hungry Like a Wolf, very 80s, also very good. Hungry Like a Wolf, great song. The cover by Real Big Fish of that song is also quite good. And speaking of Duran Duran, 21st Century Sha-Na-Na Girl, great song. Very good song. Okay, so now that it's become clear that I do enjoy 1980s music quite a lot, one thing that I did want to talk about also was the Doctor bringing up again how history can be written. Now, I believe that the previous Doctors had laid this information on Rose and sort of explained that. And one, again, it's a nice callback, but another thing is it also really does a lot to explain basically all the seemingly endless contradictions and continuity problems in Doctor Who. And I believe it was even Stephen Moffat who said very early on when the new Doctor Who started, basically like, this is a time travel show, of course there should be time inconsistencies and contradictions. And you know what? I like that. I like that because it is a simple explanation for why so much in Doctor Who contradicts itself, or just doesn't really make sense. And you know what? There's really nothing more I can have to say than that. I like that it's, for the most part, the Doctor just sort of tears around time willy-nilly, does what he wants, but also has to sort of maintain this bizarre balance of, let's keep history on track and let me just blunder into this situation and do whatever I think is right. Consequences be damned. It's such an interesting mix. And I also like this episode where we get to see, again, in very stark contrast to the Ninth Doctor, the Doctor is at his foremost attempting to work things out peacefully. He is attempting to get Skaldak to just go away, just walk away, to trying for the peaceful resolution. Something the Ninth Doctor would really have never done, or at least not at first. And again, pleading with people to try and work things out peacefully. Again, such a just such a classic Doctor thing. And one of the things that I do like that is generally very consistent across the Doctor's various incarnations. There are very few aspects of him that are as firmly entrenched as the Doctor will try and reason with people. He will almost always go for trying to achieve a peaceful solution at first. But, what fun are peaceful solutions, right? It is also, of course, in great keeping with Doctor Who tradition for, of course, the Doctor's pleas for peaceful solutions to completely fall on deaf ears, and for everything just to go to complete hell. Like one of the all-time great examples is the episode Warriors of the Deep, where, again, like in this episode and in older episodes like the Sontaran experiment, the Doctor and the companions stumble into some situation where there's some alien horror happening. People end up starting to get picked off one by one, and in extremely grim fashion, at the end of Warriors of the Deep, the Doctor and his companions were the only people who were left alive. Now, there of course are times when there's usually was at least one person also who survived, but yeah, very, very, very in keeping with Doctor Who tradition for them to find themselves in this sort of a situation. Of course, this, as people have pointed out, this situation is also in many ways reminiscent of stuff like Alien. And even here you can sort of see some touches from like things like John Carpenter's The Thing. Great movie, which also came out in the early 1980s, I believe 1981. But like I said, great movie. I mean, also really one of my favorite movies in terms of just stuff like actually really capturing the horror of being trapped in some really isolated situation with a monster that's picking people off one by one. I mean, seriously, The Thing, I think, is really the pinnacle of that type of horror story. But anyway, moving on. Let's talk about speak slowly and clearly. Okay, another nod to old-timey episodes that I really almost forgot to mention was the HADS. Oh cripes, I forgot what the acronym stands for. But anyway, the TARDIS's self-defense system. Again, like the Ice Warriors, this is something that comes from the Doctor's second incarnation, and I believe has not been seen since then. Which, really, you would think that is something that the Doctor would try and employ more often, but given how that works out for him this episode, maybe it makes sense that he doesn't fiddle around with it too much. Have they mentioned the chameleon circuits in New Who? I can't remember. I always liked that. That made for a few nice little jokes in the Fifth Doctor's era. And, oh yes, of course, we can't do this episode right. Can't do it justice without talking about the fellow who was playing the Professor whatever. Again, I like the Doctor being referred to as Professor. That's actually a nice little nod to the Seventh Doctor. But no, the Russian Professor, was of course played by a very notable British actor by the name of David Warner. And I looked at his resume, and wow, I had not realized just how much stuff this guy had been in that I loved. In terms of animated stuff, he's done some really nice work there. From the 90s, he was Ra's al Ghul on Batman the Animated Series, and the Lobe on Freakazoid. Man, Freakazoid, that was a great show. But, for sci-fi science fiction fan, he's also got two other really noticeable roles. One of them, again, from the 1980s, actually 1982 if I remember correctly, was Sark in the original Tron. And Tron is one of those movies I saw I don't know how many times as a kid, and Sark was one of the first real movie villains to really make an impression on me as a kid. So I have some real fondness for Sark and just the original Tron in general. I haven't seen any of the newer stuff beyond the first two episodes of Tron Uprising that I reviewed, and he really gave a great performance in Tron. But the one role that he's played that really made me freak out a little bit when I saw him was the role of Gul Mared. And if you're a Star Trek fan, maybe that doesn't quite ring a bell with you at first, but let me try this on you. How many lights do you see? There are 4 lights. Yeah. He was the Cardassian who tortured Captain Picard in that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. And ultimately, look, you know what? I don't have anything more to say. If you know Star Trek The Next Generation, you know the episode I'm talking about, and you know that it was absolutely balls out one of the most awesome episodes of the entire series. Just phenomenal performance from Patrick Stewart. And of course, David Warner was his enemy in that episode, and he just really just absolutely delivered. And a just unforgettable performance. Oh my god, I can't just oh man. So yeah, folks, this episode I like how oh yeah, I really got off track there. I like how just this once the whole thing of the Doctor pleading for mercy actually friggin' works. It actually works out. Now, okay, now granted, it's not the first time that things have worked out for the Doctor. Just this once, everybody lives. But it's so rare. And again, I had Warriors of the Deep where everybody but the Doctor and the companions died on my mind. So really seeing the positive outcome was really a surprise and an extremely pleasant one. Especially given the darkness, seeing the 9th Doctor bubble to the surface. So yeah, some really nice, very smart writing there. Great casting, just a really good episode of Doctor Who. This is really the sort of thing that I come to the show for. Now granted, this episode was a little bit of a throwback, but that's okay. Doctor Who, so much of it, especially the modern Who, is those nods to the older eras of Doctor Who. And this episode shows that the way those older stories work, they can still really deliver a solid episode here now in the 21st century. And with that, folks, we're going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.